And welcome to the April 18th, 2023 regular meeting of Findlay City Council. We will start this evening's meeting with roll call, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Mr. Baumann?
Here.
Ms. Frischi?
Here.
Mr. Greeno?
Here.
Mr. Hellman?
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Slough?
Here.
Ms. Warnicki?
Here.
And Mr. Wopser?
And Jeff's just on he's had to grab a phone call, but he will be here. I don't know how you want to handle that.
We will follow that with a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to accept the previous city council minutes. Mr. Slough.
I would move to have the minutes approved as circulated.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the acceptance of the previous city council minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are accepted. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-ons, replacements, or removals from tonight's agenda?
Yes, we have an add-on for ordinance 2023-043, Phase 2 benching project in the legislation section. Just added in an omitted exhibit, which is a list of the properties in question, and move that be, I guess, added to the ordinance.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adding that to tonight's agenda say aye. Any opposed, nay. That is added. We have no proclamations, we have no recognitions or retirement resolutions. We do have one petition.
A petition for annexation from or by Phil Rooney, agent for the petitioner. A legal description for said property is attached. It's for County Road 212 and 236, located both in Marion and Cass Townships.
Questions or comments? This will be referred to the law director for resolution and services legislation. We have no oral communications, no written communications, reports of municipal officers and departments.
City income tax monthly collections report for March 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Fire Department activities report for March 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental activities report for March 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Precipitation and reservoir levels report for first quarter 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
City Planning Commission minutes for March 9th, 2023, as well as the agenda for April 13th, 2023, and the staff report for April 13th, 2023.
Questions or comments? Minutes, agenda, and report to be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court activities report for March 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Summary financial reports as of March 31st, 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Let's see. Yeah, I lost my place, I'm sorry. Letter from Mayor Mern regarding Maumee Watershed Conservancy District Memorandum of Agreement.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Auditor Stashak regarding retirement settlements.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding Miracle League donation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding appointment to the Hancock Metropolitan Housing Board as well as the Parks and Recreation Board. These appointments do not require council's confirmation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Fire Chief Eberly regarding firefighter hazmat training.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on April 4th, 2023 to continue the strategic planning process. We recommend continuing the strategic plan process. Minutes attached.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve the committee report.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Mr. Stashek.
Thank you. Just to note for the record, the minutes attached were not approved by the committee. And the reason I mentioned that, under old business, I had made some comments, and there are some items in the terms of the way they were transcribed that are not correct, but I would reserve that detail for the committee.
Mr. Wobser.
That is correct. This is a translation from Jacqueline Homan, as she took the main part of her reason for taking these notes was to get the votes, which I think are indeed correct. If you want the full translation, there is a beautiful YouTube video out on YouTube. You can go back and watch all 90 minutes.
Any other comments? All those in favor of accepting the Strategic Planning Committee report, say aye. Any opposed, nay. It is accepted.
The Water and Sewer Committee met on April 11th, 2023 to discuss stormwater rates. We recommend the city administration continue to develop the stormwater rate plan update.
Questions or comments? Mr. Stashek.
I had a comment here regarding the training I've taken regarding committee reports. For them to be thorough, it's my understanding from the training from the state auditor's office that you're supposed to be able to discern the detail of what happened in those meetings. And I just confirmed with the clerk for council that the graphs and items that were passed out, as well as my report regarding the internal controls, are not attached here. It might be wise to attach those so your report conforms with at least the intent of the rules, but the way I've been trained.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye.
We don't
Any
have
opposed?
no one made a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, we need a motion first. Mr. Russell.
Move to approve the committee report.
Thank you. Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Mr. Russell.
Move to attach the documents that Mr. Stasiak mentioned to the committee report.
Second, Mr. Wobser. All those in favor of both the attachment and the committee report, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. It is approved.
The Water and Sewer Committee met on April 11th, 2023 to review the City of Findlay utility billing audit. We recommend the city administration continue to work on recommendations from the internal control evaluation and report to this committee the progress.
Mr. Russell.
Move to approve the committee report and attach the audit to the committee report.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report along with the attachment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. It is accepted.
The Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request from Daniel.
Dan from Brett State Farm.
Thank you.
Majewski, I'm guessing.
Majewski Insurance Agency to rezone 315 North Blanchard Street from R3 small lot residential to C1 local commercial. We recommend approval as requested.
Mr. Baumann.
I make a motion for passage of, or acceptance, of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Committee report is adopted.
The Planning and Zoning Committee met on April 13th, 2023 to continue January 5th, 2023, February 9th, 2023, and March 9th, 2023 discussions on the zoning code changes. We recommend that Hancock Regional Planning Commission initiates a process to adopt zoning code changes by sending a letter to City Council announcing the proposed changes.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is adopted. Legislation, we will start with resolutions.
First reading for Resolution 12, 2023. A resolution stating what services the City of Findlay, Ohio will provide to the territory proposed to be annexed to the City of Findlay, Ohio, situated in Marion and Cass Townships, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, being a part of the south half of Section 33 and part of the southwest quarter of Section 34, Township 2 North, Range 11 East, Cass Township, also being part of the northwest quarter, part of the northeast quarter, and part of the southeast quarter of Section 4, Marion Township, Township 1 North, Range 11 East, also being a part of the northwest quarter and part of the southwest quarter of Section 3, Marion Township, Township 1 North, Range 11 East, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, a tract of land consisting of 15.043 acres of land, more or less. A long description.
Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2023-32. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into contracts for the purchase of a replacement generator for the City of Findlay water treatment plant, appropriating and transferring funds thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann.
I move for passage of ordinance number 2023-032.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Baumann?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2022-33. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into contracts for the construction of various projects listed below, appropriating and transferring funds thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were raising your hand.
I can.
Mr. Baumann. Okay. Mr. Baumann.
I move for adoption of ordinance number 2023-033.
Second, Mr. Russell. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Frishy?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2023-35. An ordinance amending ordinance number 2022-119 of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to extend the current moratorium on the establishment of any skill-based amusement businesses in order for the City of Findlay, Ohio, to consider incorporating the proposed additions into the current zoning code as outlined below before enacting them as part of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of the ordinance.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2023-36. An ordinance amending one section of codified ordinance number 2022-81 as amended, known as the salary ordinance of the City of Findlay, Ohio, and repealing all other parts of ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2023-37. An ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann.
I make a motion council's statutory rules be suspended and ordinance number 2023-037 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Slough. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Nay.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy?
Nay.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2023-37.
Mr. Baumann.
I move for passage of ordinance number 2023-037.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion. Ms. Frishy.
I think we're doing a great job with the Strict Center. I'm not sure if there was a need that I missed that we needed to suspend rules, but since that's gotten done, I guess I just want to talk on the part about this legislation. Originally, when this project started, I was still on council back then. $250,000 was appropriated to seed that account to do a $1 million strict center, and that was to do 2 buildings. And then somewhere along the line, well, I should say we raised a bunch of money through the community, and we did a great job with that. I think over 600,000. And then recently, or somewhere along the line, the discussion changed that these 2 buildings were being separated out for CDBG funds. I don't quite understand the reasoning behind that. And I reached out to Jeremy, and Jeremy referred me, and I'm terrible with names, his sidekick, and Mr. Roush, is that correct? Because there was a conflict there that he didn't want to be involved on that. But what kind of surprised me was we passed at a couple meetings ago to allow the administration to enter into contract with Klaus. Normal, this whole process is completely different than what we usually do with all these phases. And I didn't realize, and shame on me for not reading better, but that committed us to spending another $800 and some thousand. So then I went back and I looked at the capital discussion, and it was discussed, and I don't know if anybody didn't realize it, or maybe I just didn't realize it, but there was no discussion on adding to our capital planning for the Strict Center an additional amount. So we're quite over budget on it, which I'm not against it at all, Chief. I think this is a great facility we're gonna have in Findlay. I'm just concerned about the transparency because Mr. Roush's email said it's always been 2 buildings. And I went and got the documents that are on the city website, and it calls it one structure, 2 buildings, $1 million. So I guess the other red flag to me was we usually get a letter in our council packet with legislation explaining, and there was no explanation. And I'm disappointed in that transparency. Even if cost of material went up, great, but I don't think it could have gone up that much. So I support the project, but I think we're not being transparent in communicating what's really going on, and I'm disappointed there.
Any questions or comments? Ms. Mayor.
So Councilwoman, appreciate you bringing up your concerns, because certainly we always want to be transparent. So obviously this project has been over a significant period of time. A couple of items of note. First of all, though the city did make an initial seed towards the project, when we presented it back in the capital plans, then we did have additional money planned for the construction. Our goal was to fundraise the rest of it and be able to gain support. And we were fortunate that number of groups did step forward and support the project. You are correct in that the cost did inflate, however, not as significantly as I think you're implying. So we did separate the projects out. That was not our original intent, but when the CDBG dollars came up and could help, we did separate that off because it's cleaner for reporting purposes, and that is how it was requested both by the state for those funds as well as by our internal controls with the auditor's office. So yes, the cost did go up. However, this project had been planned for a number of years, and all of our costs were estimates back in 2017 when we first started this conversation, and obviously things have changed significantly. The reason that there was not another letter included with the legislation this go round today in your packet is because it was in your last packet where Engineer Roush brought up that there was a mistake when he submitted the letter to Denise requesting the legislation be drafted, that it had enter into contract, do all that, but did not have the appropriation, which is the reason that this is being brought up. So I think that I'm glad we can all agree this is worthwhile. Yes, is it more expensive than we had originally planned? Yes. However, I think ultimately, it is a good project. We're not hiding anything. It's just how we move money around to best leverage resources. And we had been planning, even when we brought it up in past conversations, that the city was going to have to put more than just that initial seed money in.
Mr. Baumann.
Rob, Jeremy, just so I'm clear, minus the mistake that occurred, that can happen to anyone, I might add, right? We had already intended, this body had already passed and moved such legislation. The intention was already there to move this money, but for the error, we had to. So technically, this legislation's had 5 readings, right?
On a technical person, yes. This legislation went through the first 3 readings and passed. Then when we started to move the money through the internal process, through the auditor's office, Deputy Auditor pointed out that the language that the legislation passed, but it did not have the word appropriate in it. Therefore, we had to start over and run the same legislation with that specific word in it through again. So for all intents and purposes, this is the 5th time we've discussed GMP 4.
Ms. Frishy?
I just have one more question, Mayor. CDBG funds that we received, why did it need to be separated out? What was different from it being one project that those funds could not be used?
Yeah, because there's certain, Lizzie Essinger would be the ideal person to explain the specifics of the grant, but she's not here this evening. I don't think she's hiding over there. So CDBG dollars have very specific criteria that we have to be able to provide data on. Because of the live burn function related to the training, the state said, okay, yeah, we could give to your overall project and we could give this amount, but from a reporting standpoint, being able to say that because you are providing a specific safety training related to live fire burnings, your data supports the funds better related to this. So we could have given it to the general project, but they said you're going to score better when you request and apply for these funds if you tie it to just the live burn building based off of our run rates and live fire response.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2023-38, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council's, this is in essence, an accounting change to ensure that funds are pulled from the general fund versus the SC M&R fund. Move that council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its 3rd reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its 3rd reading.
Ordinance 2023-38.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2023-038.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2023-40, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a contract extension with ACP Green and Associates LLC, doing business as Planning Next, to provide consulting services and implementing a strategic plan for the city of Findlay, appropriating funds thereto and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-41, An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Maumee Watershed Conservancy District and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for continued flood mitigation improvements in and near the city of Findlay and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-42. An ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-43. An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to accept permanent ownership of properties in order for the Board of Commissioners of Hancock County, Ohio to transfer the parcels listed on the attached exhibit to the city of Findlay, Ohio and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-44. An ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
As our common practice, when an organization donates money to the city so that we can improve our infrastructure and something like this, we gladly accept it and suspend our rules. Therefore, I make a motion that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2023-044 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. All those in favor of the suspension of the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough. Aye. Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2023-44. Ordinance 2023-44.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2023-044.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy. Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
And Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2023-45. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director of the City of Findlay, Ohio to apply for and sign the necessary agreement or agreements to accept awarded Public Utilities Commission of Ohio hazardous materials training and planning grant program funds for tuition costs associated with hazmat training for the City of Findlay, Ohio firefighters and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
As we traditionally do when just asking for permission to apply for a grant, we suspend rules. Therefore, a motion that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2023-045 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of the suspension of the rules, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The suspension of the rules has been approved, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2023-45. Ordinance 2023-45.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. Mr. Wobser.
I think this would fall under old business. After we went through the process of the ARPA demolition program and taking out the Y properties and then voting down the total program itself, I received several emails, phone calls from citizens who were concerned about the other properties that were on that list, which did not get much notice and or discussion from other than because the Y properties took all the oxygen out of the room. With that, I guess, Ms. Mayor, have you had any thoughts about reintroducing legislation to take care of those other properties that honestly, probably quite honestly, could use a little demolition?
So we did communicate to those other properties and, shared kind of what had happened to the program. We had been discussing internally maybe the best way to move forward. Obviously, we want to continue to address, and we actually received quite a bit of publicity. One of the positives of all of the rigmarole was actually quite a few other properties reached out and were interested. So I think what we will do is gather a little more information from the folks that have reached out to us and then come back to you all on how we may be able to address that. But we have not really put much additional thought. I had taken my lumps pretty good, so I was kind of letting that one cool off for a while. So we have thought about it a little bit, but no specific plan. So we will gather our thoughts and come back to you all.
Mr. Webster?
I would just add to that. I appreciate that, Mayor, and I understand it was a difficult situation for everyone involved. It was good discussion amongst the community, but I do think that there's some good that could be had from that program ultimately that would benefit the city. And quite honestly, I was surprised at the calls and emails that I received after that for properties that were not involved in the with the Y renovation.
Any other old business? Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
If I just may, we talked the rubric that is out there in the application process. So if you guys have any specific thoughts on how you would tweak the program to make sure that it is, serving the intent and meeting the need of the community, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email.
Any other old business? Mr. Stashek?
Thank you. I had a question or a thought regarding ordinance 2023-043 with regard to the parcel list that was put out. One of the questions I have is I want to make sure this body and is fully informed with regard to any potential environmental concerns or issues that did, or doesn't exist on the properties. This area, north of the river, saw a lot of heavy different types of use, whether it be industrial use, commercial use, different things over the 150-year or so period that we're talking about there. So specifically, I'm hoping that there can be a summary by parcel of any environmental or other issues outstanding, and where there has been or has not been a phase 1 and or phase 2 on those parcels. I think that would behoove you to do that due diligence prior to approving this ordinance and accepting these properties in our coffers, particularly to make sure we wouldn't end up with any outstanding liability long term. And that may have been done, and if that's been done, I'm just not aware of it. So thank you.
Ms. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm happy to put something formal in writing. However, this is the area that the commissioners will be benching, so they're going to be doing significant dirt work and are responsible for any remediation. As you may recall, the city of Findlay worked with the county commissioners and regional planning, and the commissioners applied for and received a grant through the state of Ohio for brownfield cleanup specific to the Rainick properties. So there has been significant environmental work done on this area to make sure that it is in a clean, appropriate condition before the city would accept it. But I will work with the commissioners to provide more formal documentation of that.
Any other old business? New business? Mayor?
Jumped in front of me. I'll be very brief. I want to just give a huge shout out to our income tax department. They have been inundated the last 2 months, but especially today and this week as they've been working with folks to collect income tax. They are doing a wonderful job, and we know that they are exhausted. So if you can shoot them a kind word, that would be much appreciated. I know they are also working through the process, talked to the team last week, and they're gathering data and preparing for the implementation of their new software to really kick off here in the next month. And they wanted to pass on their thanks, as they're all very excited about the capabilities of that system and how it will bring us into a couple new centuries probably from that system and being able to meet the needs of the public. So thank you for all supporting that and the good work of our team. I think the bank account will look good.
Mr. Baumann?
I did just want to mention the Shade Tree Commission, in conjunction with Wilson Vance Intermediate School. We'll be hosting an Arbor Day celebration and tree planting this Friday at 2 o'clock at the elementary school.
I've got one bit of business. I just want to remind council and put it on the record that due to the election being on Tuesday, May 2nd, per our new council rules, we will be meeting on Wednesday, May 3rd at 6 p.m. Mr. Wobson.
And adding on to that, Mr. President, the strategic planning will meet on that same day, Wednesday the 3rd, at 4 o'clock p.m. to continue our discussion.
Any other new business? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Russell, second Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.